Can you hear me? Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming, joining us at this event on this Sunday afternoon. The side event is hosted by the Green Climate Fund, the Independent Integrity Unit. And I'm Karen Ernst. I'm the head of the Independent Integrity Unit of the Green Climate Fund. I'm pleased to be moderating this panel here today. And I would like to extend my thanks to UNDESA and all the organizers of this SDG Pavilion for the opportunity to host this important event, especially the logistical and technical staff here in the background. Thank you very much for hosting us here. The focus of this panel here today is to facilitate a discussion on the synergies between climate action and the broader framework of sustainable development, emphasizing the significance of integrity in this process. In our discussion here today with our panelists, we aim to identify really practical approaches to enhancing collaborations between governments, private sector entities, civil society actors, and other private or other stakeholders to foster really accountability, transparency, and integrity in climate action. Would like to highlight also something that yesterday, I don't know if you were aware, yesterday was December the 9th, and that was an International Anti-Corruption Day, which is a UN commemoration day that brings together integrity officers worldwide in the fight against corruption. This year's theme was Uniting the World Against Corruption, which I believe is very apt actually for this COP, where we all aim to come together around the world to push for climate action. And I would like to say that everybody here can be part of these efforts too by pushing for increased transparency and accountability in climate actions, and also advocate for really stronger integrity policies in the organizations that you all work in. Let me turn to my distinguished panel here and the panelists that have so kindly agreed to take part in this. If I may start with Ms. Mirai Atala. She's the chief of the Nature for the Climate branch at the UN Environment Programme. She holds 2 postgraduate degrees in land use planning and environmental management and policies, and has 14 years of professional working experience in the field of environment, predominantly consisting of resource mobilization, project portfolio management, and coordination of operational support to countries. Her work experience spans across the private sector, public administration, national and international NGOs, as well as the UN, where she has been employed since June 2006 in different capacities. We also have Ferdian Yazid. He's the program manager of the Natural Resources and Economic Governance Department at Transparency International Indonesia. His work focuses on promoting transparency and anti-corruption in the natural resources governance and the private sector in Indonesia. During his 8 years of working with Transparency International Indonesia, his work spans across research, advocacy, and building engagements with the private sector, and civil society in the energy, mining, fishery, palm oil, and forestry sector. He holds a bachelor's degree in criminology from the University of Indonesia. And we have Amjad Bani Issa, who is a climate justice advocate and EU Deal Connector from Jordan. He engages youth in policy making on climate change and monitors the United Nations climate negotiations with a justice perspective. He coordinates regional projects to bridge the gap between youth and policymakers and promotes a greener economy, leveraging youth energy and creativity. Thank you for joining too. And last but not least, we have Anselm Duchow, who is currently the head of the GIZ Water, Environment and Climate sector in Morocco. He holds a master's degree in agricultural economics from the Technical University in Berlin. Climate policies, agriculture, and management of natural resources are his area of expertise. He has more than 20 years of professional experience as senior policy advisor and project manager for the FAO and the German International Corporation in several African and Latin American countries. Thank you all for being here. And I now will start with a set of questions, which I'm sure you're all very able to answer given your vast experience in this field. After that, I will also open up to questions you may have here in the audience. I would like to start with Mirai. Um, it's a critical time, as you know, for climate action and a critical time also for implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, the implementation must be free from corruption and transparent in the process to be effective in addressing actually climate change. Can you share with us some of the best practices or lessons learned from your work with UNEP or the Sustainable Development Goals about how to integrate best practices, integrity best practices in climate action? Thank you. Over to you.
Uh, Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. So maybe I will start by referring to the emissions gap report that produced recently, released ahead of COP, that shows that we are currently on track towards 2.8 degrees in the best case scenario, maybe 2.8 degrees in the average scenario, in the forecast 1.8 in the best case scenario. I would also like to refer to the adaptation gap report that shows that adaptive finance needs for adaptation have been actually grossly estimated, and that the 50% increase or doubling of finance of adaptation for finance is extremely low. And I'm saying this because being in a session with the GCF, that actually means that every single penny counts, and that making sure that every penny that is intended for mitigation outcomes, adaptation outcomes, actually reaches and achieves what it needs to achieve. So, stemming from there, UNEP withholds the highest levels of integrity in our work. Now, as it's never about UNEP working by itself, it's UNEP working with partners, UNEP working with civil society organizations, with the private sector as well. It's really about making sure that the philosophy, practices, and the integrity actually trickle throughout, horizontally and vertically across the board. Um, and here, maybe I would like to take an example of a GCF project in Rwanda, where we were implementing ecosystem-based approaches to adaptation, and where really prioritizing what are the areas where we're going to, what are the communities that we're going to support, what are the areas that we are going to prioritize was very critical process, because it meant that we had to allocate finite resources to huge demands. And so I think first and foremost, the starting point was conducting together with the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Water Resources that were involved, very transparent and open selection process for these communities to start with. So the geographic focus was driven by a transparent process to make sure that was, we've seen that in many cases, that sometimes you will have a minister or a deputy that will steer international finance towards their home village or towards their own community, because that enables them to acquire more votes for the next cycle. It's nothing uncommon, if I can put it this way. So upholding a transparent process at that level was critical. And then within the communities, once the communities were selected based on very open and clear criteria, everyone knew what we were selecting against and what we were selecting for. Then the next step was within these communities as well to conduct very open processes of identifying what are the priorities for ecosystem based adaptation. Because, as you know, I cannot think of a single SDG that does not depend on natural resources and ecosystems function for achieving it. So, in order to do so, again, it was important to conduct a transparent process within the community and to identify what are these priorities. Now, that was interesting because in it's sometimes of a trade-off between transparency and other aspects. So there are communities, it was necessary to understand the dynamics, the political economy within these communities. And so speaking about youth, at times you don't necessarily have a space for youth, because it's the community chief and the community elder that will take the decision for youth. So here it was a trade-off for us a little bit between, do we conduct um, consultation processes with the whole community where we knew that there might be the elite capture of decision-making process versus conducting consultative processes with segments of the community. So, for example, dedicated processes with youth, dedicated processes with women, dedicated processes with business owners, for instance, so that each would have a space to express their perspectives. And here it was a little bit of a difficult one, you know. We opted for the latter because we absolutely wanted to hear the voices of youth. We absolutely wanted to hear the voices of women. And then it becomes a communication process with the community to share the outcomes and the results of these consultation processes, and making sure that, you know, that lack of transparency from not having the process open to everyone is somewhat curbed.
Thank you very much, Miai. That's already very interesting to get to know. You've already started sharing some of the experience. Do you have other experience? Can you give a concrete example? Maybe you mentioned the project in Rwanda. Do you have other multi-stakeholder experiences? Multi-stakeholder engagement is something that also for the Green Climate Fund is hugely important, and we're always keen on hearing stories here from other organizations. Can you share also where you have integrated integrity practices in these projects? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, sure. I thought that was for a second round, but it's okay. So yes, of course. I mean, I will pick up on a relatively different topic, which is the topic of RED, reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, where, as you know, one of the four elements of the Warsaw Framework is for countries to have in place social and environmental information system, and to have a summary of information on safeguards, right? And so and this is critical because it's important to make sure, because the finality of RED is essentially to have results-based payments transferred to countries on the basis of mitigation outcomes, or on the basis of reduced deforestation, right? And then that comes together with a benefit distribution plan, a benefit sharing plan, and an allocation of resources, financial resources, important financial resources, between governments and different other entities, right? And different other communities. So here I'll take the case of Paraguay. That was one of the projects that received results-based payments from the GCF in the first, or in the red pilot rather than the first cycle. We hope that there will be a second one. And so, in the case of Paraguay, it was really necessary because the initial payment was of 50 million US dollars as a results-based payment. What materialized is 25 million. But so, in practice, what it meant was, I think, a little bit over 150 consultation meetings, submissions of documents on how benefits would be distributed, what way they would be allocated for, what is the proportion of resources that would go to government versus the proportion of resources that would go to communities that were within the area that actually had delivered the Red Plus results, right? Or the emission reductions from Red. But it was also interesting because it was also a trade-off and a discussion between sectors. Um, Now, for many on the donor side, many see that the use of proceeds from results-based payments from Red need to be reallocated to Red, or to forest action, because of the concern about leakage, reversals, permanence, so on and so forth. For many forest countries, it's a very different perspective. It's a perspective of, we use these results-based payments from forests in order to support our development objectives, which in many cases can be education, health, and so on and so forth. So that actually took us to a different scale of negotiation and discussion, and well, not really transparency, but exchanges and debates around how these proceeds would be used. And I have to say that it was not necessarily a very easy discussion because of that dichotomy between red resources need to go for forest versus red resources are results that have been already achieved, already verified, for which there was a reduction factor that was already done. And therefore, I've never asked person from whom I bought my cell phone, did you drink your money or produce more cell phones or pay for the education of your daughter or children? And so that was a little bit of the dynamic that happened. But I think that at the end of the day, it's really sitting on the table all together, looking at the different options and essentially negotiating around those.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ferdinand, um, moving to the field of corruption within the larger field of integrity. Um, you working for Transparency International Indonesia, can you speak about how you engage with a variety of stakeholders in Indonesia and the world to actually monitor corruption? Do you have any specific points about working in Indonesia that provide certain opportunities or also challenges in field of corruption there? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Actually, my experience is quite similar what Ms. Mireja said before. First, we need to acknowledge that every different stakeholders from different background might have power imbalance. So probably it might be uh, not productive to gather youth, business, and government official in the same room because probably there are some of them who's not comfortable to express their concern. They are afraid being blacklisted. So we need to acknowledge the power imbalance between them. So it's better to separate discussion between each group. But however, there is also another challenge that might be typical with the Asian experience. So in Indonesia, revolving door and concurrent position is two things that are common. So there's one of my experience that when I held multi-stakeholder forum in one of the least developed province in Indonesia, uh, we made a forum with Anti-Corruption Commission and TI as the third party, and also held discussion with uh, the local government official and also with the local businessmen. And one of the interesting thing that we just found out that there was a member of parliament that we didn't invite. So we were confused because we didn't invite any parliamentary body in this meeting, but why did they come? What did he come? So actually, he's also become a businessman. So so it's really like insider information. So composition is often happen in Indonesia, and it could impair decision making in Indonesia. In also in climate policy. So we need to also realize the background of the person that we are invited to the multi-stakeholder forum like this. And uh, however, we uh, also must stand firm in the science, just like Miss Miri before. Uh, our world is getting hotter, so we need to, let's say, in short-term world, we need to degrowth, uh, less business, less extraction. So if we tend to talk, let's say, we tend to talk with businessmen, probably they say that global warming is something natural. So, but the science said the opposite. So we need to stand firm on science. So we also shouldn't be driven by certain interests because if we uh, discuss heavily with only one stakeholder, our judgment might be biased as well. So, you know, stand on science, evidence-based advocacy. It's really important to know really what happens on the ground and to be fair. And also, but the opportunity by conducting multi-stakeholder forum is also abundant. So, for example, we are engaging with one of the largest climate finance scheme in Indonesia. the JETP, Just Energy Transition Partnership, and we held forum discussion along with civil society, JETP Secretariat itself, the representative of the government, and also with National Electricity Company. And we were talking about corruption risk in the early retirement of coal-fired power plant, and most of them uh, quite agree that this is problem that needs to be addressed because any corruption that might occur in the climate agenda uh, might undermine any climate action. So the reputation of climate agenda might be impaired by any corruption practices. So that's the benefit of multi-stakeholder forum. So in Indonesia, I think maybe also in another region.
Thank you. I also have a follow-up question for you on this. A critical aspect of climate action, as also represented in the Sustainable Development Goals, is actually the concept of just transition. And only yesterday, I heard your colleague from Transparency International in the headquarters, I believe, talking about that. And what that means is making sure that actions prioritize the need of the marginalized, poor, and the vulnerable communities. Can you speak on the ways that Transparency International Indonesia or maybe any other Transparency International offices work with civil society organizations to make sure that really just transition is actually happening? Thank you.
Yeah, we also realized that in this energy transition movement, one of the main topics that was discussed by the uh, party delegates from the government delegates might be where's the money to transition from dirty energy to clean energy. That's all they asked. They forgot about the importance of emphasizing the just element in energy transition. So, as for example, Indonesia, along with immediate friend from Greenpeace delegate, we are also conducting research regarding corruption in the land clearing process. So actually, the land itself was known to be one of the area which rich nickel reserve. So as well, nickel reserve is highly needed for uh, clean energy technology. But suddenly, because the demand increase, so this area uh, convert into mining area just in a short time. So we are in the process of conducting research, and also we live in that area for about 2 weeks to experience uh, the changes and also any bad impact that is caused uh, by mining sector and also by smelter manufacturing. And in order to amplify our result, we are also in the process of creating documentary movie called Bloody Nickel. So just to just to attract a national attention and international attention on this energy transition could lead to another problem because we are only focused on searching for the new material that is suddenly highly needed, but we didn't consider the impact uh, uh, that might be very uh, that might be impair the affected communities. So just the message is quite simple, but yeah, because we are living in the comfortable zone like this, probably we can grasp how the situation was.
Thank you. Thank you for this, Ferdian. Amjad, in the work of the IAU, we very often talk about, and even nowadays, actually more and more about engagement with civil society organizations. And we see a growing role and need for civil society organizations to hold governments, other organizations accountable, and also to provide for greater transparency in climate action. Do you think that there are similar ways that youth could be engaged in ensuring integrity in climate action? And what do you think youth groups could bring to this space? If you could help us answering that question, would win a lot. Thank you.
So apparently this is a very tough question, since we have program directors and chief of climate branch and program manager here. So youth interaction or youth engagement is a very tough aspect to handle, especially with the fast-paced environment where we're living in. But my fellow colleague Marie stated that they conducted consultations, but we have levels of youth participation and engagement in the spaces. So the first one is obviously consultations. That's where you organizations have insights into the work of youth or different stakeholders, and they have different perspectives, and they can collective combine like a collective understanding of the or assessment of the space that they are being involved in. But to me, I like to use this tool that we call contracts consultations. So this is a very interesting outcome that usually gets shadowed by the importance of the collective findings of the consultation process. So contracts consultation is where you consult, let's say, experts in the field, and you consult a group of youth in the field. So this creates an understanding of the capacity gap required, where you have an insight into what is missing from the youth to make the transition from youth into experts in the field. So this is usually getting shadowed, but I understand it is of nature that not every program manager or program director is a sociologist, neither a socioeconomical expert in the field. But this is a very interesting tool to be used in the future. The second form of participation, which is on a higher level and a much more interactive one, is incentive based. Now, this is a controversial space to maneuver, but to me, I see it as a key solution for certain problems. I'm not talking only about financial incentives, because that sometimes can put a burden into the budgets and goes with the bureaucratic processes and all. But capacity building incentives. So you're using the consultations that you use with the contrast consultation tools to assess the capacity gaps, identify them, and you can incentivize youth by introducing them into those capacity building programs. Now, this moves us into the third level of interactions or engagement, that is the interactive participation. Now, this is a very tough topic to untangle for people because it usually involves youth in every cycle of the program, starting from the design phase into the conclusion phase. Now, this needs to be activated. This needs to activate the negative and positive feedback loop. Now, if you involve youth, let's say, into development of action plans, this would give you a further insight into what is the capacity gap that they have into developing action plans. If you are including them into assessment cycles or writing assessment reports, this would give you an insight into what they are. Apparently, sometimes youth are well capacitated. Now, because they are labeled as youth, they are overshadowed directly for this process. Now, this could be leading into a more organic, community-based, we call it like a scheme pyramid scheme, but like the total opposite of it, because you are using youth to build capacities for other youth in the same community, utilizing whatever aspects they are excel at or moderately good at. Now, this allows the organic creation of natural of networks among youth that are connected to international organizations, and this allows sharing of connections, sharing of networks, and um, sharing of opportunities. In the long run, this contributes to the intergenerational access of opportunity. Now, that's a very interesting aspect if you look at it um, from a long-term sustainable pathways that you want to draw on your country. Now, all of that is considered youth participation at the minimum level. Now, yeah, that's very interesting actually. So Yeah, so what we are looking at is what I call the pinnacle of participation, and that's what we aspire to have, and we push forward to it is self-mobilization. Now, we need to understand that true empowerment only comes with optionality. Now, if we have options, I sometimes I will not go to that consultation session because to me that would not add any value to me or to my career path or to the community I'm building in. So this means that if you have options, if you have full support, and this is where the organizational aspect comes in. So you need and you require a very enabling framework that allows mistakes to happen, that allows certain movement to happen rather than focusing in progress and focusing on achieving outputs and outcomes. Now, this is super interesting, and this moves me into the next points I'm going to go over. Um, in order for you to allow the exploration, you need to invest on not making the right thing rather than making mistakes in order to activate the negative feedback and you know where not to go. This would allow you to build communities of youth that they know what we are going, they know the way that to achieve that, and they don't have the bureaucratic frameworks or the political like internal policies frameworks of donor organizations to abide by. And this is for someone who has worked with the civil society organizations for the past couple of years and understanding donor CSO's relationship. A lot of compromisation takes place. Now, this amends CSO's strategic plans, and this allows donors to continue the power hierarchy. Now, if certain amount of budgets are put aside for explorations, that's conducting research and development into community building. And this is totally been overshadowed for the past decades. That's not new on the spectrum. So um, this takes me to the next question that you asked is why youth, what do they bring to the table? Now, youth, as I mentioned, have different insights. And the first one is we have technology in our hand. Like the rapid increment of technological advancement that happened in the past 3 decades. Sorry, but old folks can't keep up. It's as simple as that. There's a lot of learning and there's a lot of capacity building. And for youth in the crowd, how many of you had to like, export a PDF for your boss? It's simple. It's super simple. For us, it takes like 3 seconds. For them, it requires an assistant to carry out the communications for emails and all. So now, this rapid advancement in technology, youth are capable of keeping up with, and especially within involvement of AI and all. So there's not so much unlearning that we need to go through, and there's only continuous learning process. Now, for the older generations, there's a lot of unlearning to unpack. But at the same time, the learning process is so slow since there are multiple aspects of capacities that are not, and usually they have very busy schedules. Now, the momentum we bring in, this allows us to engage heavily in our communities, to mobilize on faster paces, because to a certain extent, youth enjoy a very freedom, a very sense of free civic spaces that they can engage in without the whole policy frameworks in their countries or their contexts. So, to me, as a climate justice advocate from Jordan, a Middle Eastern country, this dichotomy between do I need to focus solely on activism or do I need to work with international NGOs into breaking the current situation and free us from this framework that they had been adopting for the past decades? For me, I see the way forward is to involve youth in multiple ways. And it's okay if you are involving them on like the shallowest level. That's understandable because this is a very long-term process. And the paradigm shift we want does not only apply for the communities, also apply for the international NGOs and the donor side. Sorry, I took a lot of time.
No, no, that was already very engaging. A lot of insights. Can you speak more generally about the role of youth in implementing specifically these sustainable development goals? There is, as far as I know, there's no specific SDG focused on here on youth. So how do you see the collaboration between youth and other sectors helping to advance the SDGs?
So SDGs in their nature are very comprehensive, and like it's an umbrella where we all operate and serve at the same time. So for youth to to have a specific sustainable development goal that they solely work in, to me, is impossible because our work covers all sectors. Our work requires collaboration between different stakeholders, and that allows us to explore different places where we can put our energy in. Now, sometimes, actually sometimes, a lot of the situations involving youth is not an option. It's a necessity. Like, let's say, for example, in Jordan, Jordan has a population of 11.5 million people. 63% of them are under the age of 30. So youth involvement is not an option, it's a necessity, and it is something that you need to clearly work on strategic basis. And I believe this had been going great for us because this year we have around 25 youth representing Jordan. Yeah, we had pre-COP high-level ministerial meeting. Um, and I had one yesterday, I believe, and we'll have one post-COP. So this is involvement at its finest for me, to involve youth and put them on the table to understand what they are aspiring for, what do they want from the governments, what do they want from the stakeholders, and see how can we collaboratively all work into meeting the sustainable development goals.
Thank you very much. That gave us a lot of insight into engaging with youth, which is becoming such an important element nowadays. Amzal, you're a project manager and coordinator for the GIZ in Morocco, and you must be engaging also with a lot of stakeholders across many levels, not just youth, but many levels all the time. Can you speak about the importance of this engagement for effective climate action, using examples maybe from projects that you work on? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen, for this question. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I think you're the real heroes on a Sunday afternoon, almost the last day of the convention, and you go into integrity questions, which are also not the funniest sometimes, but very necessary. So thank you again, Karen. I'm from GIZ, which also deals with public money. So obviously we follow strict codes of conduct and have ethical protocols and everything. We also accredited to the GCF, and there are lots of questions we answer in this accreditation process about this. And we support countries also. The national direct access organizations in this field. And one interesting thing, maybe together with Transparency International and you, is that GIZ also helps the peer-to-peer alliance to exchange on integrity question with the climate finance. There are 7 countries member of this. I don't know exactly. There's, I think, I'm going to look up the countries that are part of this. But it's there's some direct work on this question internationally, which is quite interesting. So yeah, when it comes to our country engagement in the countries, the policies we support or the activities we support for climate action, the multi-stakeholder dialogues and processes, they're kind of the most important thing to do. You already mentioned that in the RED context. We did this now very recently, for example, in Morocco, working on the framework for Article 6. So yeah, you have to discuss that with all society to see what are we actually, do we all understand the same thing of this mechanism? How does it work? And how do we set up the rules for this to work? And how do we make decisions? What project is going to benefit from carbon credits? But more importantly, what project should actually enter in such a scheme? Because then obviously the country has to do more to attain its own climate objectives, and you can easily get into the problem of overselling. So this is an interesting discussion, and actually we go into even positive and negative lists of what you promote and what you do not promote. So this is just one example. We also working on, for example, preparation of the COPs. We did it with young people in Tunisia. I remember, like we did it a couple of years ago, but I hope it repeated after that. It's doing like simulations with young people to go into to kind of to how do you call that, like model United Nations exercise, where you go into the role of another country, and by that, you know, you put yourself in somebody else's shoes and start negotiating and understand. And all this is not directly linked to to integrity or anti-corruption, but it turns policies and turns engagement of the country more known, more transparent, and facilitates civil society engagement, and by this also accountability of the country. So this is extremely important, I think, in before you come to real questions of corruption and rules and regulations of public procurement or what have you. So maybe this as a starter, I can, if you want to come back to some points, I can tell more.
We actually found also on the GIZ Morocco website that you have an emphasis on good governance, including that you provide services and support to Moroccan partners in the fields of equality, human rights, decentralization, and also the improvement of dialogues with citizens. Can you speak about, or have you ever measured how these efforts can also lead to more effective and impactful climate action? Do you see in your work a focus on transparency and accountability that go hand in hand with climate action through this support?
Yes, I think it does actually. We there are, I mean, in Morocco we have like a program that is on energy transition. Then there's climate, environment, water, but there's the governance portfolio also, and there we work on all kind of different things. The most important maybe is to help the country in its decentralization policy. So we go into the communes, we go into the regions, and help draw the local climate action and the local planning all together. We also have a program with the Ministry of Finance on good financial governance. So there it's there we have to create in the subnational level more literacy on how you draw up a budget, how you read a budget, how you monitor a budget. We work with the Ministry of Finance on budget tagging exercises. So this is fashionable right now, but it's extremely necessary to try to align public budgets on the NDCs. I mean, this is not my team, but we have other teams that work on very practical questions also of public procurement to make it end-to-end digital, for example. This is also can help a lot in terms of you know, guaranteeing that there's no misuse or no corruption going on. So whenever it's possible, we work with these teams in the field to link this up to climate policies, and very often it works out, especially in the regions where the teams are together, where you involve directly partners. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have heard from very different. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Before we move on to Q&A, Anselm, he mentioned the project that you worked in with the Tunisian youth. I'm glad to tell you they are currently the official youth delegation engaging in negotiations, and they negotiate on behalf of Tunisia. Yeah. This is what we talk about youth involvement and involving more and engaging them more and more. Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning that, Amjad. Thank you. So we've heard from 4 very different panelists about experience involving stakeholders, very different stakeholders, also very different experience here. Are there any questions or comments that you would like to share with us? Do you have your self experience, or do you have questions to any of the panelists? Please, over to you. Yes, please. There is.
Good afternoon. I think I agree with your point on the necessity to engage young people in taking action. But we also witness, I think, not just in Asia, the shrinking civic space and the kind of reaction of the government when it comes to youth engagement. There seem to be more repression. They would probably consider youth as a threat rather than constructive partner, for example. In Southeast Asia, 1/3 of the population are youth, so it's very relevant to engage young people. So my question would be, how are you managing these kind of challenges in terms of the limitation of engagement when it comes to civic space, governance issue, as well as the shrinking freedom of expression? In probably the question go to each of you as well. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I will answer that. So basically, it's very context sensitive. Each country has its own context and its unique circumstances that we need also to understand. But fighting back civic spaces is very complex because the whole reason of the existence of civic space is to push for a what the people think and what the people want. Now, this sometimes is welcomed and it sometimes is not welcome. So, whatever situation you are in, you always need to assess the stakeholders that you are engaging with and understanding even the most authoritarian regime there is. There's a stakeholders where some people are totally opposite to you, some people are very neutral, and some people are on your side. So, in whatever context, and this applies to everything, whatever context you are in, you need to understand the situation you are in, assess what you can do, what's yellow lines, what's red lines, and start basically a continuous loop of trial and error. Sometimes the errors need to be very, very limited. So, and you need to understand that this sometimes has consequences in certain contexts. So, assessing those consequences is the way to move forward. What yellow lines are green lines now? Now, what red lines are yellowish? What red lines are total red lines and we can't go there? And how do we make red lines, yellow lines, then off to green lines? And this apparently requires, as it also applies to people and governments. In sociology, countries have a certain pathway. And this pathway also requires, if you are pushing for a paradigm shift, this requires a longevity. This requires a very long-term strategic plan that you have. And what I mentioned about pushing the red lines and the yellow lines, this has to be in a strategic way where you can at least achieve many steps or many goals that you set for your organization. Let's say, for example, we had a consultation, a ministerial one, and I was very upset that we only had a consultation. I wanted more involvement. So I was literally nagging in the General Assembly with the UNDP. I was like very nagging. I'm like, we just had a consultation. I'm very upset with the outcomes. There now, this and that. She's like, you are a very in like a good position. You guys had a consultation. Some minister they won't even sit with their people. That made me realize sometimes we are very tunnel vision that we don't realize the situation we are currently in. So we need to adhere to the fact that there are some good aspects, there are some bad aspects. And whatever situation you're in, we need to assess ourselves and the way to move forward rather than letting emotions or our own narrative and our own tunnel vision guide us. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Or would any of the other panelists like to add something to this? If no, he is, I think so too. Yes, I think so too. Any other questions? If not, I would like to close it. I mean, and I thank very much the panelists for being here with us, really for sharing here their insights. I think the one thing that I took away also from other discussions, because multi-stakeholder engagement is really, really important. And it has become such a buzzword that sometimes I think we underestimate a bit kind of resources and time and energy really goes into this. But without it, it's not, climate action is not possible. It's really about understanding your stakeholders and designing processes, starting probably with consultation, but then really actively involving them. This is probably the key thing that I took away from here. Thank you very much. Thank you also very much to the SCG Pavilion. Thank you.